Welcome back to The Doctor is In with Dr. Nadia Sabeh. I'm Dennis Wadan, Dr. Sabeh's producer. This episode is part of our What Plants Crave series, where Dr. Sabeh speaks with growers, researchers, and other experts in controlled environment agriculture to get their insights about the direction of the industry and, of course, what exactly it is that plants crave. On today's episode, we're speaking to Kathleen DeBrota, Director of Horticulture Operations at AeroFarms, a leading indoor vertical farming company. Thank you for listening.
Hello, welcome back to the Doctor is In podcast. I'm Dr. Nadia Sabeh, and this is our special series, What Plants Crave. Today's guest is Kathleen DeBrota, Director of Horticultural Operations at AeroFarms. Many of you may know or have heard of AeroFarms, which is one of the first commercial vertical farm operations in the U.S. They basically help turn the vision of those towering urban farms into reality way back starting in 2004. Amazing. We're like almost 20 years into the future. They've been making a lot of news lately as they expand locations and crops, including growing hops to brew beer in the UK. Hi, Kathleen. Welcome to our podcast.
Hello, nice to be here.
It's so great to have you on What Plants Crave. I'm really excited to learn more about you, the plants that you grow at AeroFarms, and the importance of applying research to the practice of growing plants indoors. So to start things off, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into horticulture and controlled environment agriculture, and how you found your way to AeroFarms.
Sure. Where do I start? I guess I've always really liked plants. I started out at Indiana University in Bloomington doing my undergrad in biology there. So I thought about doing botany, thought about doing a lot of different stuff, studied abroad in Copenhagen, doing sustainable technology and design. So that kind of got me introduced to the topic of controlled environment agriculture. So then I went on to do my master's at Georgia Tech in environmental engineering. And by then I knew I was already really excited about it, about circular economies and aquaponics. I did my thesis in aquaponics there and sort of roundabout came into it that way, but always excited about it. And ever since I had learned from Dixon Despommier about vertical farming, I was like, wow, this is a really cool topic, so much more efficient, so much opportunity to do a lot of cool farming indoors.
And how did you find AeroFarms, or how did they find you?
Oh man, well, I had heard about AeroFarms from during my undergraduate career even. So I knew about AeroFarms since then. And I was excited that they were, like you said, doing what the theory was, that you could actually do this and at a large scale and successfully.
Yeah, actually making it happen. I think early on, when I think about 2004, I mean, that's when I was kind of first starting my PhD work. And, it was sort of in the realm of the imagination and not necessarily something people were doing at scale, at least here in the US. Maybe in Japan and parts of Asia, they were starting to build plant factories and parts of Europe as well. So it's really exciting that, AeroFarms was able to make that a reality. And, just to sort of, I just want to give an homage real quick to Ed Harwood, who I knew pretty well, who is, I would say, considered one of the fathers of the vertical farm industry here in the US and a co-founder of AeroFarms. What kind of legacy has he left at AeroFarms? And do you think at our industry at large?
Yeah, absolutely. Ed, he took that idea and ran with it to the point where he was experimenting in his garage, and eventually he took it to where we are now. His legacy, really, I think everyone at AeroFarms would agree, is just that making it a reality, taking the steps to not only get the idea for the technology, but to take the steps to go and patent it and to try to really put it into action. So just being curious, exploring new realms, pushing the boundaries of what we can really do, exploring, testing, always just basically taking a dream and making it something real.
Yeah, I've always appreciated his engagement with the academic community. He was always someone who showed up at an NCERA meeting or at the university and always curious about what the latest state-of-the-art research was, and sharing also what he was doing, what you guys were doing at AeroFarms. We're going to talk about some of that later, but he was always science focused, right? Like doing the science and the research and then applying it, which makes it even more exciting to be talking to you coming from R&D. So tell me about what your position was and what you're now doing at AeroFarms.
Yeah, sure. I started out as a plant scientist in the R&D team here at AeroFarms, and then worked my way up through the ranks there. And now I'm doing horticulture. So I've switched over recently from R&D to the operations team. So it's been interesting getting two different perspectives on the same challenge. And from the R&D perspective, yeah, just staying dialed into what the industry is doing, what's happening in literature, what's happening in LED science, a lot of engineering and other interesting papers coming out of, Cornell and many other research institutions that are doing a lot of cool work on this, and a lot in Asia too, like you mentioned. But, from R&D, you're really working on a small fraction of the puzzle at a given time. And now in horticulture, I'm trying to put all those pieces together to say, okay, what does this really end up doing for us? And what can we actually do physically with that information in our farm, like tomorrow, So that it's really cool to be able to take that research that everything that we've learned in R&D and just say, now we're going to go do it. Like, here's what we're going to do next, which is really, really fun.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of scientists get the opportunity to actually put their findings into application like you've been able to. Tell our listeners, what does AeroFarms grow?
Yeah, we grow right now baby leafy greens and microgreens. I'm working on expanding into other things in our R&D team. But right now we grow many varieties of leafy greens. So kale, broccoli, brassicas, generally watercress. Microgreens, we grow several different blends and standalone varieties that we just recently commercialized. I think the newest one is our micro wasabi, which is very, very spicy wasabi mustard microgreen.
Wow. Wasabi is supposed to be one of the hardest plants to grow. You guys are figuring it out?
It's wasabi mustard. So it's a varietal of mustard that tastes almost exactly like the horseradish wasabi that you're used to.
Yum. That sounds delicious.
Yeah, it's very good.
For our listeners who may not be familiar with AeroFarms, because maybe there's some people out there who've been living under a rock and don't know AeroFarms, can you sort of paint a picture? Like if I went and visited an AeroFarms facility, what would I see?
Well, if we offered tours, you would, when you walk in, it's basically a giant warehouse with plants going all the way up to the ceiling in these tall racks. They are 12 levels high. We've got 14 towers in our current Newark Rome Street facility in the Newark Ironbound neighborhood. And they're on, lights are on, water's being pumped up to each level. You can hear, mechanical noises, and it's nice and warm in that room. So it's pretty cool walking in the first time. It's pretty cool. I will say though, our new facility is going to be 4 times larger even than that. It's currently under construction in Danville, Virginia.
Wow. Are you guys growing under pink lights? When I think about vertical farming and you see like some of the images online or that people post, sometimes you see sort of the pink light and sometimes it's white light. If you can share, like, are you guys a pink light grower or a white light grower, or does it depend?
Yeah. So right now we're a white light grower, but things will be different at Danville.
Okay. Okay. So what
Yeah.
are the benefits of growing in such a space? You know, being in this huge warehouse and 14 levels of these different crops, like why do
Mhm.
this indoors?
Well, there's many reasons. So first, there's no seasonality and the lighting is always consistent. So you don't need to worry about, oh, there's less light in winter, or temperature swings, or needing to manage that in terms of maintaining your environment. So it's just 24/7, 365. Everything can be controlled to be the same. So you can really dial in exactly what parameters you want to use and just keep those constant or change them if you wish. But the point is you've got full control. And second, there's no pest pressure or very little pest pressure, really, because it's totally closed in. We have, you walk in, you have to wash your hands, wear gloves, you have to wear hair nets, face mask, a gown, everything, so that we don't bring in any pests or anything to the facility. So those are huge benefit. That means we don't need to use any pesticide, herbicide, fungicide ever. So those are the main benefits, but there's many more.
I mean, you mentioned, being able to maintain a constant condition or not. I mean, you kind of like veered off like, or we could make a tweak.
Mhm.
Under what circumstance would you consider making a tweak? Is it based on the type of plant that you're growing or the age of the plant you're growing?
Could be either. It's up to whatever we decide we want to do. We can change sort of, I guess we could change it on purpose, for example, and I was going to talk about this later, but we could change it to purposely stress out the plant, for example, if we wanted. So we could make it dark, we could make it way too warm or too cool, or give them not enough of a given nutrient or too much, for example, to try to trigger the plant to produce different phytochemicals or nutrients, or to turn a different color, for example, all of which we have done. So you can change the lighting in a controlled environment warehouse, whereas in a greenhouse, that's a little more difficult.
Thank you so much for saying that you might actually want to stress a plant. I feel like people who are thinking about, fully controlled environment, and you mentioned 24/7, 365 a day, a year, no seasonality, et cetera, et cetera. I think a lot of people think that, like we want to make the plant as comfortable as possible, to create a certain level of consistency, right? Like that makes sense for quality control and yield control and everything. But you just said, well, maybe we want to purposely stress a plant. Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of like can you have too happy of a plant?
It's a good question. I mean, it's weird to say happy, but I think, in some ways you can. It just depends on what outcome you're looking for and what exact plant you're talking about. And so correct me later if this is not public knowledge, but we did a study with FAR, and I don't remember what that stands for now, so I apologize. But we did a study where we stressed the plants on purpose for a research project in order to try to influence their vitamin content and their flavors. So then we had a team of trained, panelists who were doing tasting panels to try to identify specific flavor notes and heat levels and all these things in our greens. And you can make a significant impact on those characteristics when you purposely stress the plants like this. And so, maybe we don't do that necessarily every day in production, but we can, and we know how, and we, could leverage that at our future farm. So that's just one benefit of that specific study.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing my PhD work, Cherry Kubota with one of her students, I think it was Dr. Min Woo, they were manipulating the nutrients in the fertigation system. And I could be wrong also here, but I think it was about EC, and they tested what the lycopene content of the tomatoes were that we were growing, to try to manipulate, right, one of these environmental variables to achieve a certain outcome. And for tomatoes, it was this vitamin content of lycopene. And I think it was stressing the plant for it to produce more of that lycopene.
Yeah. I think something similar is what they do in Japan in those strawberry greenhouses, where they're very cold winter nights, but it really actually boosts the sweetness and flavor of the strawberries.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Like, again, Dr. Kubota, she's a proponent of having a couple of nights a week where you actually have like a 0 VPD, like it's 100% humidity, because then the plant, it encourages the plant to translocate more of those sugars and nutrients to the berries, making them sweeter. So you could call that a stress condition, right? Like the plant can't breathe almost. And so there's nowhere else for those nutrients to go except, pushing to the edges of that plant.
Very cool. Yeah. Nice.
So we talked about happy and stressed plants. What are some of the challenges of growing in one of these spaces? I mean, you mentioned some of the amazing benefits, and I think it's a lot of why people are growing indoors, to create that environment that you want and need for those plants. But what's also challenging about growing in that environment?
I didn't actually think about this one.
Good.
Yeah. Let me think. I mean, because, we are limited in that we can't add, there are certain things that we cannot add to our reservoirs that you may be able to use if you were outdoors or in a greenhouse, because we market as a ready to eat crop, for example. We cannot add and don't add any sort of, like I said, pesticide for, or any of that. And so there is a risk that should something get into the grow room, that can be a problem. So that would, if we have a pathogen outbreak, for example, that could be a problem, because we don't have the ability to apply those, preventative or those chemical fixes that you are able to use outdoors, which of course is part of the reason we exist, is that people don't want those residues on their produce. But there is some inherent risk in doing that. So you have to be very careful of preventing contamination and making sure things are clean and people are coming in and cleaning their shoes and wearing hairnets and all that.
I'm really glad to hear that you guys implement those SOPs of people being clean, wearing clean clothes and scrubs and hairnets and everything. I always say that people are the vector for pests, not usually, the outside. It's what you bring in from the outside, especially if you're fully closed. Like, where else is it going to come from? Well, the people who are going in and out.
Yeah.
As you've gone from R&D to a more applied science, I guess we could say, what have been sort of the challenges that you've seen there? Like, what was really nice about working in R&D in the lab, and now you're like, oh man, this is actually harder to do in practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in R&D, there's no pressure to continue to make sure that yields are up and quality is up and everything is getting out the door on time. Whereas
you can kill a plant and you're not going to be in trouble.
Exactly. Yeah. And the opposite is true in production. So there's much more pressure on that side, for sure. So, and the other thing is too, we're trying to make sure that we can meet the customer's demands in terms of, we need this amount on this day. So everything has to be on point all the time. So that's been an adjustment.
So in your role in more of the R&D side of things, what exactly, what were you researching? Were you sort of researching different plant varietals, maybe in response to consumer demands? Were you testing different lighting spectrums or different temperatures? Like, what were sort of maybe some of the variables you were playing with? And you don't have to say what the outcomes were, but just giving us an idea of what are the environmental inputs that plants respond to that we should be thinking about? And maybe there's one that's surprising. Like, for me, I think about temperature and humidity and VPD and airflow, and people think a lot about nutrient levels and recipes, lighting recipes, but I'm throwing a lot at you right now, but is there like maybe something that people are underestimating?
Good questions. The first part of your question of what we were actually looking at, all the things you mentioned, we have studied at one time or another. So for us, we grow as sort of like a continuous media, I guess you would call it. So our seeds are placed on top of a cloth, a patented cloth that we've developed, and the roots grow down through that cloth. So for example, we could test out different types of cloth or different grow medias, seed densities, for example, how many seeds do we want per flat? How far away from each other should they be? And how do we make sure that they're getting deposited like that every time in production, for example? We've studied everything from physically stressing the plants to see what happens to their height and their strength, to changing the light recipes, changing, like you said, temperatures, humidities, nutrient recipes, fertigation timing schedules, all kinds of things.
A lot of variables. There are a lot of levers to pull and buttons to push, knobs to turn, whatever analogy you want to use. How do you keep track of all that data? I mean, you have some experience, some education in data science. Like, how do you manage so much data, and what advice can you give to people who want to experiment in their own farm? I mean, I have a couple of thoughts, but I want to hear from you what you think is important as people do experiments.
That's a good question too. Yeah, we manage our data we've got an IT team who helps us with a lot of it, but we organize it. The organization of the data is actually critical. And I've been helping a little bit lately with that on the ops team, just trying to streamline a few things there, but you have to basically keep it all in the same place and think about how you want it to be organized before you start. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble later with trying to reorganize.
What does it mean to organize data?
Yeah, so I guess you have to think about granularity of your sensors, for example, and consider that you might have one sensor in the middle of the room that you use as your temperature sensor, and you use that as your value. But really, maybe the temperature near the door is cooler and in the back corner is warmer, or for example. And so you got to imagine, how much data do I want to collect, and at what granularity level is it going to be most useful, for example. So per flat or per tray of plants that come off the tower, we want to know what was the yield, how was the size and quality and all that, but we don't really need to know the exact temperature and humidity for every single flat, every single space along the tower, for example. So that knowing where to put your sensors, how frequently you want to look at the data from those sensors, and then kind of matching all of that up in a table will, first of all, help you automatically generate a lot of graphs and insights and things like that, but also just keep yourself sane and organized.
Yeah, we talk to a lot of growers who kind of fall into that trap or are tempted to fall into the trap of, we'll use temperature. I can talk about temperature all day long, who want to, measure the temperature over every tray, or at 3 points over every tray. And they're like you, right? Like they're 14 stacks high and 20 stacks wide. And you're just like, what are you going to do with that data? Like, how is that going to inform any of your decisions? Number one. And number two, do you actually expect the HVAC system I designed for you to control to every single tray based on like the deviations? Like, there's got to be a way to narrow this down and figure out like which sensor is going to produce, right, the outcomes, the overall general outcomes for that entire volume of production area.
Yeah, for sure.
So the first thing you said is, when it comes to evaluating data, number one is organization. What's number two?
Yeah, I think number two is making sure, you have to make sure that you know what to do with it, I guess, and be able to visualize it in a way that is helpful for you. So if you've got a table of numbers, not helpful. If you have a graph, a little more helpful. If that graph has error bars, even more helpful, for example. So having a realistic expectation of your data and the amount of granularity you have and the amount of control that you really have. And also being able to see that over time or between varieties or between locations in the grow room, for example, being able to just easily toggle between those views is helpful, at least for me. I in R&D did a lot of exploratory data analysis where I would simply try to plot one variable against another or two variables, against a third, for example, and try to just do correlations, a lot of data mining, just to kind of try to see what it was the outcome on yield or quality or temperature or EC, for example, when we made a change to one other variable. And that's the key to it, is trying to get those correlations, trying to get the variables to cooperate with you, and being able to visualize those, I think, is key to that. There are ways to do it without seeing it, but I really like doing
That's
EDAs.
painful.
I know.
What is an error bar?
Oh, I just mean being able to see the spread of your data. So what is the distribution of the yield data points? Maybe it's a normal distribution when they come out of the growing tower, for example, or maybe every single flat has the exact same yield. Amazing. But, they're probably going to have some slight variation, and being able to see the range of where those are falling. Maybe that range gets wider or smaller when you make a certain change, for example. Just,
Got it. So the goal hopefully would be to have pretty short error bars. That's hard to say, error bars.
Yeah, I think you could think of it like a standard deviation.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thought that comes to my mind, and you just mentioned, like if you pick a variable and then you pick another variable, and how does that affect the original variable? One thing that I always think about when it comes to experimentation, and what I see people are doing in their in-house farms, is they will change 4 variables at one time, right? And it's like, and then they get a great output or they get a crappy output, and then it's like, well, which of those variables actually affected the outcome? Did all of them together affect the outcome? Like, what is your advice in terms of testing variables?
Get a grow chamber.
Okay.
Preferably 2, so you can do 2 side by side. I mean, it's very hard to keep perfect control over. If you change one thing, by how much did you change it? Maybe you didn't change it by enough to see any impact.
Well, that's
or maybe you changed it so much that things actually got worse. And then you're saying, oh, well, I'm never changing that again. But you don't really know that was the actual outcome. You may have just gone too far, for example. So
sure.
A grow chamber is for sure going to be really much more dialed in terms of doing experiments with those type of things, or at least a small system where you can do multiple different replicates next to each other, where you can be sure that you're controlling 9 out of 10 variables and the 10th one is the only one you're changing.
Yeah.
The other thing that I find difficult too is that there's also the time factor. So things do matter earlier or later in the growth cycle. And if you change something early, maybe there's no effect, or if you change it late, maybe there's a huge effect, right? And keeping that constant the whole time can be a challenge. So
that's a really good point. Yeah, I could think of a lot of examples about where it matters in the beginning or it matters at the end, maybe how you give light to a plant. I mean, if you have a plant that has a vegetative and fruiting and flowering stage, what you do at the beginning of that plant's life versus the end of that plant's life might be different. And do you need to tweak that one variable throughout its entire life cycle, or are you really just changing it at specific points in its life cycle?
Yeah. And that's actually, I mean, that's partly, it's close to what I worked on in my thesis of trying to understand those individual variables impacts on how the plants are doing and how they're going to grow and how that impacts the entire just kinetic trajectory of their growth path, which it's like a 20 variable multi-dimensional surface problem that no one in history has answered. And it's very, very challenging.
So is AI and machine learning gonna like take over our jobs or your job as a data scientist and researcher?
I doubt it. I doubt it strongly. I think there's always room for the grower in the picture, but there will be, I think, some tools that come out of AI and machine learning that can help us to maybe dial in a few things.
What do you think that is? Like creating doing the organization itself and producing pretty surface plots that we can just look at the end?
That would be cool. Yeah, sure.
But somebody's got to train it first, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yes, for sure. And that's not an easy task.
Crap in is crap out, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I always think
you have to know what you're looking for before you can tell a computer what to do.
That's smart. Which is, another follow-up question to that, this whole idea of AI and having machine vision and camera imaging inside our farms, or outside our farms for that matter, right? With satellite and Landsat and everything. Do you think that AI or machines will ever take over the grower's job?
I don't think so. Not fully. Like I said, I think it'll be more of just a tool to help the grower understand what is happening and be able to respond either more quickly or more effectively or both.
Yeah. I hope that's true. Coming from agricultural engineering specifically, farming is arguably one of our greatest inventions. And I kind of don't want to take it away from us, from the human experience. It just feels non-human or unhuman somehow. Though, yeah, I guess we gave the wheel to a machine, so whatever. But we use it as a tool, right? We really
Exactly.
use the wheel as a tool to get from point A to point B, or to move water from point A to point B, or however we're using wheels. Mm-hmm. So how do you think about efficiency? How do you and AeroFarms employ, like, what kind of technologies or practices, strategies do you employ to improve efficiency, whatever efficiency means to you?
Let's see. So I guess just the whole concept of the vertical farm is already an improvement on efficiency over being outdoors in terms of square footage. Okay. And the number of crop turns you can get per year per square foot. I don't remember the statistics on it, but we do. I mean, like I said, we can grow all year round. Could be a foot of snow outside. We're still growing happily indoors. To our customers who are, again, local, because we are located in Newark, New Jersey, we're right down the street from the distribution centers that service New York City, New Jersey, and there's millions and millions of customers there that are not having to get their lettuce shipped in from California. So, right. So, you don't have to spend so much gasoline and so much time in a refrigerated truck coming across the country, losing your shelf life, losing product quality, losing nutrient content in your plants, and all that greenhouse gas emissions of shipping can be drastically reduced, for one thing. So I guess in terms of inside the farm, we do also like recycle our water. We can target the nutrients to exactly what the plants need. So you don't have to just broadly apply fertilizer outdoors, which of course creates runoff and pollution problems. So we avoid that. And, we're always trying to do more with less, even more. I mean, maybe this is the same for all farmers, but we're really trying to optimize the process in terms of what resources, packaging, lighting, energy, water, nutrients, everything that we're using, just to try to dial it in as close as we can.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of embedded energy in fertilizers that people may not realize. And even like thinking about transportation, it's not just about gas miles, but you mentioned, refrigerated trucks. And, being an HVAC person, what that means to me is refrigerants, huge global warming impact, not to mention the heat that's generated by those air conditioned trucks, by the reefers releasing that heat to cool the space in between, that storing the produce. There's and of course water, right? I mean, the fact that we have the opportunity to recycle, reuse the water in, a circular system as opposed to just a once through pass through a crop. And you even mentioned targeted irrigation. I think those, when it comes to agriculture, it's water, right? I mean, I know that there's like this big thing about energy and, like how much energy do vertical farms use, like all these lights and all this air conditioning, et cetera, et cetera. But, honestly, we're going to figure out energy. We're figuring it out. But water is, I mean, a limited resource that we are tapping way too quickly. And we need solutions like this to really conserve the water that we have available to feed 7 billion, 9 billion people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess one other thing that came to mind as you were mentioning that is just the fact that our plants can grow almost twice as quickly too, because they get everything they need right when they need it, right at the root zone. There's plenty of oxygen. There's nothing, no pests causing pressure. So it's already just inherently more efficient in many ways.
Yeah. So we talked about data and now we just talked about efficiency, but I mean, when you are, we talked about data in terms of the research, but in terms of the application and the practice in the farm, why is data important there? So now you're not playing with those variables anymore, right? You've done that in the R&D and now you're in practice. When you like show up at the farm or the grower shows up at the farm, I mean, what kind of data are you thinking about? Are you looking at? And how is that important to the outcome? I mean, are you trying to, what do I want to say? You did the R&D and you figured out exactly what variables, what intensities or levels and concentrations that you wanted in the R&D, and now you put it into practice. Is it challenging to recreate and simulate what you did at the R&D level now at the application level? I know there are kind of a few thoughts in there.
Yes and no. Yeah. I would say it's not that it's challenging to recreate. It's just constant monitoring more than anything else, and making sure that the data stream, the data integrity is there. So you have to, I mean, most, I guess, of what we would do in operations would be making sure that those targets are being held where we want them, and making sure that the sensors are working to, ensure that, of course, if something goes wrong, you want to catch it right away. And so the data at the farm allows for immediate monitoring, response, and remediation if there is a challenge or something that goes wrong.
What do you mean by constant monitoring? Like, is someone just like constantly staring at a screen? Or
No,
are you checking in like every few hours or every day?
Mm-hmm. We've got systems that will automatically alert us if something is out of range. So we have, like I said, a bunch of sensors all throughout the farm that all send their data to the internet, and the internet is amazing and can tell you as soon as something is, hey, this is wrong, this is outside the range where it's supposed to be. So we do obviously
set the parameters of what that range is.
Yeah. So yeah, we can change those. We can change the set point and tell the computer, hey, we want to make sure, temperature doesn't go outside of this degrees to this degree. And if it does, we will know right away.
How does that data inform, I mean, specifically a decision that you make?
Yeah. So that's a good question. I think where I was going previous with that is we're always sort of learning from every grow that we do. We never just set and forget. We are always looking and monitoring and checking. Like we said, hey, we had, something really bad happened or really good happened. We want to make sure we capture all the information that came from that so we can either never do it again or do it every time. So
Right.
I guess it's something I took for granted, but yes, we always are learning from every grow that we do. That's why we have all the sensors.
So
in the
that
growing
brings up a
room.
really good question, because I mean, you had the R&D, you went from R&D and now you're in more application. Does the feedback loop go the other direction? Like what has been found on the farm, you're like, oh, we should test this, and then it goes to R&D.
Oh yeah, definitely, absolutely. And I'm being in the position that I'm in, it's a unique opportunity because that was my favorite part, is just trying to, apply these things from what they needed in operations, to say, okay, well, we're having trouble with this. What can you guys do in R&D about it? And sometimes maybe it's like, oh, well, that's something that you guys need to work on yourselves. And maybe it's like a human factor, for example, or so-and-so was out and they were the one who were supposed to blah, blah, blah. But usually there were many times where we would need a different variety, for example, of seed. And because we had trouble sourcing the previous seed that we were getting, so R&D had to say, okay, well, now we're going to go through our program to test or to give operations, hey, this is the seed that we had ready for you as a backup, for example.
That's really interesting. I was going to ask you where you came up with your ideas for research. I mean, we talked about, there's academic research and some of the things that come out of that. I mean, do you actually try to recreate some of the academic research in-house to sort of pressure test it, stress test it? Like, will that work for what we're doing here? Or do you think academic research is academic?
Oh, we have for sure recreated stuff we saw in papers. Yeah, we maybe didn't do it the exact same way they did in academia, but we have definitely seen a paper and gone, that could be something we could try, and tested it out.
Very cool. And have you usually come out with the same results?
Now that,
have you ever gotten a different
twice
result?
I'm thinking of two examples where we did, yeah. And some things are more able to be immediately put into practice than others. So maybe we can't install like a thermocouple or something on the cloth to see the heat flux going in. At one point,
come on,
lots of things getting crazy. But no, we have done a lot of many different things in testing inspired by papers over the years. So
have you ever reached out to those researchers and said, hey, we'd love for you to test this at a peer-reviewed level, or if you got a different result, say super different result than what you saw in the research and the publication, would you reach out to that research group and say, hey, we've got something different, can you test this? Or I don't know, do you also communicate the other direction with academia?
I don't know if I know the answer to that. I think we have. I believe so. I know that we have worked with university partners, like I said, on the FAR project before.
Yeah.
Where the feedback was in both directions, for sure. So we were both working toward the same goal, but it was a joint effort. I'm trying to think of, we've certainly helped write grants before.
Cool.
With university partners. We've had, I think, a postdoc in Jerry Kubota's lab who worked with us. And I think to answer your question, yes, we have. I don't know all of the details because we have a sort of separate business development R&D team that works on that. And I was mostly in the commercial side.
Okay. I'm just thinking in terms of making sure that academic research is actually fulfilling your needs, right?
Yes. And I know that for sure we have someone on our team who specifically reaches out and works with works with academia to make sure that sort of the research that they're doing is going to be sort of useful for us in terms of application, and it maybe helps answer questions that we have, which would be better suited to an academic lab.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially because this is such a new industry. And I feel like academia is sort of trying to catch up. It's so wonderful to see so many new controlled environment ag programs and horticulture programs popping up all over the country at every level, right? From community college through the universities and land grants. And it just makes me think like we want to make sure, because this is so new, but we're growing so quickly. This industry is growing so quickly, to make sure like, the academics aren't just going off on some tangent because it's interesting scientifically, but are also like, meeting your needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that people are really intrigued by and interested in working with us, because we try to push the cutting edge. I mean, we're building a research facility, AgX, in Abu Dhabi right now, specifically for doing all this type of research. And that is partnered, I believe, check me later on this, partnered with UAE University there. So maybe it's not here in the US, but we are for sure doing that.
Why the UAE?
Water. Yeah, one word answer is water.
I love it. Very cool.
Yeah.
Because they have all the energy in the world. Like literally.
Right, but right. And they're very water stressed. So it makes sense for them for sure.
And it's very humid there, like crazy hot and humid. So also just thinking about what type of agriculture are you going to employ? Is it going to be outdoor, greenhouse, or indoor? If I just think about the climate, it's indoor all the way, just to beat that humidity, really.
Yeah. And it's a great place to learn more and then be able to apply anywhere.
I mean, are you guys trying to grow different crops and do R&D on different crops there to meet the different consumer demands? I recently read an article I didn't read an article. I talked to Dr. Merle Jensen when I was at the short course, and he said that when he was in Abu Dhabi, that they had no idea what to do with broccoli. Not that you're growing broccoli.
We're growing broccoli microgreens. But yes, we are for sure, to answer your question, looking at different crops for different regions. And yeah, I think that makes perfect sense to do, of course. Why work on something no one wants to eat?
Or knows what to do with.
Right.
But apparently the Middle East really likes arugula. So I think you're in good shape there.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good news.
Yeah. Speaking of different types of crops for different regions, I just have, I know I said this at the beginning about like growing hops, and I don't know if you were part of that necessarily, but doing the R&D, growing hops, and then giving it, I guess to a brewery in the United Kingdom. And I just made, I was like, oh, why the UK, and I was like, oh, well, beer, of course. Right. Like, I mean, is that why? I mean, how did you guys find a partner in the UK to use your hops, and why not maybe somewhere locally? And you probably don't know.
Wish I knew the answer to that. I'm sorry. I know. I think I heard that it was because they were trying to push the idea of vertical farming or indoor farming there specifically in the UK, because I guess it's less of a popular thing. Correct me if that's wrong later, or cut that out later if that's not right, because I'm not sure. I was tangentially involved only with the hops project. I was there seeing the updates, and I got to kind of hear about it all the time and see the plants progress as they were growing, but I wasn't directly involved. So
why hops? I mean, why any of these plants?
Yeah, so typically vertical farming is best suited for plants that are very delicate, very expensive to grow, typically outdoors, or very water intense. So watercress being one of them. Microgreens, because they have such a short shelf life, it's best to grow them as close to the consumer as you can. They're, the nutrient levels in them can start to go down quickly, so you want to get them out the door right away. So high value crops that don't grow too tall. So strawberries, blueberries, hops, they do grow tall, but you can trellis them.
Like a tomato plant?
Like a tomato, right.
Okay.
So tomatoes, cucumbers, hot peppers, herbs, things that are valued and a little either have a challenge with water or how they are responding to pests. I know strawberries typically have quite a lot of pesticide
applied.
So if people are looking for specifically a high quality product that has a good flavor, that they don't need to worry about pesticide or herbicide, that they want fresh, those are some of the drivers. There's other things too, economics drives a lot of this, but they can't grow too tall, so they're not going to be growing a tree inside anytime. But
well, it's interesting that you brought up some of the vining, trellising crops, because I traditionally think of those as greenhouse crops, and you don't see a lot of fully enclosed warehouses growing those plants, and maybe it's because traditionally vertical farm, right? You mentioned like the plants have a low profile, and you're trying to fill up the full volume of the warehouse. I mean, when it comes to hops, with being a trellising crop and growing tall, why not just stick with the typical low profile plant?
For the hops, I think specifically the interest was in getting the fresh, I think they call them wet hops. Now, this is not my area of expertise, but I believe because they are fresh, they have a different flavor profile. And also this was a research project we did. So that I believe they were looking at what impact different colors of lights or spectrums of light exposure would have, different warmth and cooling periods, what impact that has on the flavor of the hop at the end and how much resin they produce. And so being that I wasn't directly involved in that project, I apologize, I don't have all the information, but I believe that was, one of the many reasons to at least explore this as potential for further commercialization.
Yeah, I know that there's work being done at, I think it's Colorado State, on hop production in greenhouses, and there's been some interest at the U of A and maybe some other universities, but it's always been in greenhouses. Because I think there's, especially with so many microbreweries and local breweries, they're dry hops is the standard, but I think, like you said, there's different flavor terpene profiles that stick around in the fresh hops before it gets dried out through the drying process, that would allow brewers to have a unique and different product. But it's the same issue of transporting something fresh from point A to point B and keeping that profile.
Right. And doing it off season.
Of course. So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because I think most of the hops now is grown in like Oregon and Washington. Sacramento is actually a great place to grow hops. Where we live now used to be like, I guess, a huge hop field, like where CSUS is. And it was taken over by the university, all that farmland. But a few local breweries have sort of resurrected that idea of growing hops here because, of course, Mediterranean climate and everything's great to grow everything. But you all don't live in California, so no. I'm so sorry. While we're talking about flavor, I mean, one of the most interesting things I ever learned from Ed was how I guess I'll start with how AeroFarms was testing, like really at the consumer level, different flavor profiles of the produce that was growing at AeroFarms. And I remember at one of the NCRA meetings, Ed was telling us how he took the test to see if he would be a good taste tester, I guess, flavor profiler or whatever. And he's like, I was horrible at it. Like,
yeah, it's challenging.
I mean, you don't hear about a lot of growers doing this. I mean, you guys have an actual program, right?
Yeah, so we actually recently did we had done one in the past, but we did another training with a company that specializes in training people to really get down to the exact flavor notes. And they give you sort of an example of each flavor note, for example, grassy or ozonic or earthy or something. And they literally give you a jar with dirt in it that you smell to get the idea in your head ready of this is what earthy tastes like. And, or not earthy, but this is what the aroma of earthiness is. And this is what umami is, or heat, or spicy, or grassy, or these other things. So we recently did that. It was very interesting training. And we evaluated all of our leafy greens and microgreens against those things. And we're continuing to do that now.
How can people sign up to be on this like flavor panel?
Well, we do it internally right now, but
Okay.
it would be super cool to do it with volunteers, random volunteers.
Do you find that even internally at the company that some people like certain flavors more than other flavors? I mean, are you actually ranking it, or are you just saying like, oh, this was spicy or this was earthy, or do you actually, is there also an extra question at the end? Did you like it?
It depends on what we're doing. If we do a comparative tasting panel, let's say in R&D, we would do something to change some aspect of the growing process. We would maybe compare that against a control and say, well, which one did you like more? But that's less helpful than saying, how sweet was this on a scale of 1 to 10? And how grassy was this? Or how characteristic of arugula, for example, flavor did you think that this was? And from those numeric, trying to quantify these things that are very nebulous overall, trying to, apply that specific flavor knowledge, remembering the training that we went to, has been helpful in trying to narrow in, okay, this actually helped in the flavor, or no one could tell the difference, or this made it worse. We shouldn't for sure do that.
Why is quantification of those variables more important than I liked it or didn't like it?
It gives you more to work with, and you can see if maybe someone hates both, but they hate one less, for example.
Okay.
Hopefully they don't hate it at all, but maybe someone likes it. They can't tell the difference until you ask them to specifically think about one flavor note. Like, let's say it's sweetness. They'll say, well, if you were just thinking, do I like this or do I not? You might not pick up the fact that maybe this one does taste sweeter than the other one. Maybe that's why you like it, for example.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I was just thinking about arugula, and we grow arugula in our little office vertical farm, and it's our favorite thing to grow. Not just for us, but when we have visitors, we're like, oh, you gotta like take a piece of this arugula leaf and eat it. And sometimes people don't even know what arugula is. I always find that interesting. But then they'll be like, oh my God, like that's so spicy. We tend to grow really spicy arugula. So then last summer I was out at Ohio State for the Optimia meeting, and Dr. DeBrota was talking about trials that they were doing with arugula. And she said that in Ohio, in the Midwest, they don't like spicy arugula. So they're actually playing with, you're right, I think it's EC actually, or no, it's pH, to see how it affects the spiciness of arugula to make it more mild. Because, here in the West or in the Southwest, we probably really like spicy things, but in the Midwest, maybe not so much.
That's interesting. Well, I'm from the Midwest and I like spice, but
okay, good.
I won't take it personally. No, but that's really cool. And yeah, that's something that you maybe wouldn't even be able to quantify until you would do a training like this and try to rank something on a scale of 1 to 10. That would be hard. How spicy is this? Like if you had 6 types of arugula, you would need some type of benchmark or something before you'd be able to really make an informed decision about anything. Absolutely. So that was a really cool program we did.
What's the difference between heat and spice?
That I don't know.
Oh,
I think so. We did one that was like, what happens when you eat wasabi or horseradish. So the nose burn pungency. So that we can differentiate from a spice heat, a burn that would be from like a jalapeno, for example. That one we did talk about, and our greens tend to have more of the nasal pungency than the burn, but they do have some of both, being from the mustard family.
So one of those would be considered heat and one would be spicy, or they're just different levels of heat?
She referred to them as different because the nasal pungency was a physical factor, not really a flavor or aroma per se. It was more like she separated it into 3 groups. There was like the physical, the aroma, and the taste. So taste would just be your typical sweet, salty, sour, umami, bitter. then aroma is most everything else. So grassy, earthy, whatever, all these other things that you can sense with your nose.
Because you're not going to put grass and soil into your mouth.
Right. But also, just so that, if you plug your nose and you take a bite of something, you're only going to taste the taste. You're not going to smell the aroma, the flavor.
Sure. Okay.
So then there was the physical one that was sort of the chalky feeling in your mouth when you eat spinach leaves, for example, that dry, I think it's oxalic acid feeling, or the nasal pungency, or the burn was another one, but it was sort of like you feel it in your mouth versus in your nose.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that spicy isn't a flavor. It is actually a pain receptor
Right.
that's actually delivering that signal to your brain that this hurts. But people like spicy food, I guess, and they will eat spicy food because they know it's not going to hurt them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm curious too, I just stay on the flavor track for a minute, like even how much different flavors and aromas and physical feelings, how they all even interact together, right? Like, even if I think about like a strawberry, yes, we think about it and we want it to be sweet, but there's also an acidity, right? That pairs with it that actually elevates that sweetness. If it was not acidic at all, we actually might not like it. It would just be sugar.
Right.
It wouldn't have any depth.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
It's very complex. It's not our specialty necessarily, but we have explored that realm more.
But it's so cool that you guys are doing that, because I really don't know of any other growers who are at least going to that level. And growers, if you're out there and you're listening to this and you are doing that, please let us know, because I'm really curious, like how many people are taking it to that level of detail. It's really cool.
Yeah, we call it our flavor spectrum. This is the reason for the different colors on all of our packages. For example, our wasabi, I believe, is like a bright orange, to try to have that color associated with each different flavor. Yeah.
Love that. I did not realize that. I'm gonna have to look more closely at the packaging you guys use. Can you just send me some in Sacramento so we can do our own flavor test here?
Oh yeah, sure. Let's talk to marketing about that.
Okay, cool. So do you consider, as we started talking, as I did this call to action from other growers, do you consider this industry, at whatever scale you want, is it vertical farming or controlled environment agriculture or leafy green growers, whatever scale you want to talk about, do you consider it a collaborative or competitive industry?
I think just right now, because it's it's growing, not pun intended. It's a growing industry, so we each kind of have our own proprietary information right now, and that's normal, I'd say. But we do collaborate on the why behind things and sort of things that will benefit all of us. So whether it's like a government initiative, or for example, the CEA grown food safety standards, I know for sure many of us are collaborating.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So things you can do at the industry scale to move
everyone forward.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I get that. For those who want to get into this industry, what advice do you have for them? You took such an interesting track, and you kind of traveled around the country, or at least on the other side of the Rocky Mountains. It's interesting how you got to where you are. What advice do you give to other people who want to get into this industry?
Yeah, I definitely would say that if there isn't a program, if you're in school, if there isn't a program specifically tailored toward this and you're really interested in getting into this, I would say don't hesitate to kind of try to diversify even just the classes that you take. So I had to make my own individualized major, which is something that Indiana University offers. I did that as my second major, but even if that hadn't been a possibility, I still was able to go study abroad and I could choose what I studied there. I would say, I found my way into it from the environmental engineering and data science route, but there are many ways you can get involved. And I think if you have where there's a will, there's a way, to say it in a kind of trite way. But if we see someone, on their resume who has had experience with plants, hands-on experience or what have you, if you're passionate about it and you've got some applicable skill, then you can certainly get involved in the sphere. So anyone from HVAC engineering to chemical engineering even, or maybe obviously mechanical engineering, tons of different, pretty much anyone in engineering, probably even software engineering could get involved. Then of course, everyone on the business and marketing side, there's probably something for everyone there. So data science, data analytics, visualization, biology, botany, horticulture, a lot of different hard sciences are probably applicable. So when in doubt, STEM forever.
Yes. And thank you actually for listing all the different possibilities of how you could be involved in this industry other than just being a grower or, being in a role such as yourself. That is something in general that I love about agriculture, is that it is so collaborative in terms of all the different resources and all the different knowledge sources that you need to actually grow a plant and then get it to the consumer and then do it again, right? Like repeat, rinse and repeat, and just how much engineering and science has been built up specifically around agriculture, including multiple engineering disciplines, everything even from mechanical engineering in the water wheel, just to bring that back home, right? I mean, moving water from the river over there to your field over here. Right. I mean, that's mechanical engineering and built out of necessity.
Absolutely.
I love agriculture, which is why I don't want to take it away from us. What would I do? How do you predict this industry is going to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's going to expand. Hopefully, we're going to probably see more things being done at scale. And I think economies of scale are going to come into play, which is going to be very helpful for everyone. It's going to make everything easier. The cheaper that things are to build and maintain. I think we'll see more crop varieties getting kind of to the next level of, hey, we can actually grow this regularly in a vertical farm on a large scale. So I think we'll start to see more berries, more cucumbers and peppers, and a lot more diversity, I think, is what we'll start to see as things get easier and cheaper to do. We'll probably see more and more types of crops that have been grown not just in a greenhouse, but in a vertical farm.
I mean, what is the right scale for an indoor farm or a vertical farm? I mean, we make the claim that, we're growing more on less land, right? But everyone's scaling up anyway. I mean, is there a limit to when that is no longer an argument we can make?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that if you're stacking up, you could probably still have a very large surface area or sort of footprint and still be however many levels you are, multiply your footprint by that to get, a multiplier on your efficiency. So I would say it's probably similar to any factory where you pay once to build it. And then once you've built it, you can, return that investment for a very long time and to a larger audience, or in this case, customer base. If you've built it right the first time, large enough the first time.
Yeah. Do you ever see these farms? I mean, just thinking about the scale at which we're kind of moving in the direction of, your experience with aquaponics, there are other agricultural sort of practices, whether it's aquaculture or animal culture or mushroom production. Do you ever see these kind of interacting together at scale?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's what I worked on for my thesis. So I do hope to see it come to fruition in the future. I think it's still quite difficult to do it because it's a balancing act really between inputs from one and outputs from the other. And what do you do with any that's left over, or if you don't have enough, for example, of one as a feedstock for the next. But I do think we'll start to see more of that because those things just make sense from an efficiency standpoint. It could be just, and this is partly what I studied at Georgia Tech, is this whole circular economy, which there are some medium scale tests of that are working very well already in place in Europe. But it's very hard to do at a large scale just because of the amount of collaboration and working together that would be required. So,
What in your mind, what's medium versus large scale?
I think the one that I'm referring to, I don't remember if it's in Sweden or Denmark. I believe it's in Denmark, where it's more on an industrial scale. So it's not a farming application, but it's more of a circular economy where there's a series of industries for whom one's waste is the next input, for example.
Yes.
And I think it's something to do with maybe a paper mill. I don't remember really, so I apologize, but the wastewater from one can power the generator for the next, that can provide a CO2 source for the third, or a steam or something like that, where you start to get this ecosystem really. And why not apply that to CEA, where you've got all these different nutrient rich wastes, for example, coming out of aquaculture that are already just pretty much ready to go for plant fertilizer. Maybe a few tweaks required, maybe filtration, maybe not. And depending on what you're doing, you could feed an acre of crops with that, or you could feed on a whole vertical farm from your aquaculture operation. The challenge is scaling one piece to the next and co-locating them together. Because if you don't do that, then you're dealing with piping or lagoons or trucks or weird challenges with how far away do you gather this nutrient source from, and how do you transform it in a way that makes sense to keep everyone happy. So it's definitely a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that's worthwhile to work on. And that's what I was working on at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, that's super cool. I mean, for me, when I was doing my PhD, one of the dreams I had was, integrating CEA with commercial buildings, thinking, oh, here's people who are in, big office building, and they're generating a lot of CO2 and heat and moisture. And what if we just vented that air that's already at 75 degrees and, an elevated humidity. And I was, studying at Arizona. So humidity was the opposite of probably what you deal with in an indoor farm. But this idea of, could we capture that CO2, right? That exhaust air, and rather than exhausting it out into the atmosphere, could we exhaust it into a greenhouse or other plant production system to just kind of close that loop a little bit, just find another use for what we would normally consider a waste stream. It actually could be an input stream to a plant
Yeah. And that's a good point, because I even considered going into architecture, because there are so many ways you can incorporate growing plants in buildings or on buildings that could be really efficient uses of space.
Yeah.
So there's something for everyone.
I know. And that's actually one of the reasons why I went off and got a real job after getting my PhD is I was like, we have these ideas, like, I want to know, is this actually like doable? And so it's like doubly exciting to talk to you, like spending so much time in R&D and doing the science and the research behind the scenes, and then getting to apply that in your own real world. I think that's pretty cool.
It's been a great opportunity.
That's so cool. What is next for AeroFarms in general? I mean, you've mentioned the R&D facility in Abu Dhabi. You mentioned briefly about Danville. You're clearly expanding. I mentioned crops and locations. What are you guys doing next? What can we look forward to?
Yeah, Danville for sure is what's coming in the most near term. That is going to be a huge facility, 4 times as large. We are actively hiring. Please check out our website for that if you're interested in getting involved. But we've made so many improvements to our existing technology, the way that we grow, our automation, since the Newark facility, which is our current one, that Danville is really occupying a lot of everyone's time, because everyone's really excited about getting that all installed. We're under active construction right now. So watching the towers go up, and things are starting to happen over there. So that's what's coming in the nearest term. We're working on the next farm is going to be somewhere in the St. Louis region. So I don't know exactly where, but
towards the Midwest, you better do those flavor tests there.
there we go. There we go. See what the people want in St. Louis. So
Danville is in what state?
Virginia.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. If I may ask, I mean, were there things that you've learned from the New York facility that you're applying or not applying at the Danville facility? Like, I mean, other than like scaling, right? Because that's got to be a challenge in and of itself. But are there things that you're planning to do exactly the same or very differently in this new facility? If you're able to share any of those things.
I don't know how much I can share in terms of details, but yes, we have learned a lot. We have kept a lot and revamped quite a lot since the Newark facility was built. We've had several years. I don't remember when when the Newark facility was built, but we've had several years now to learn from what we built the first time and improve upon it. Engineering mostly has been working on that, but we've learned a lot about how to fine tune our environment, what crops we want to grow, which varieties we like the best, what customers are liking and not liking. And so we've got a lot of experience now under our belt for when we go to Danville.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Not a lot of people get the opportunity to expand into new locations. And I mean, just the evolution of AeroFarms starting in the garage and then, growing into, bigger and bigger spaces, having a dedicated R&D space, a new, larger dedicated R&D facility in Abu Dhabi. Yeah. It's exciting to see how AeroFarms has grown and sort of built off of the foundation of science and technology, and I don't know, just growing it from there. Yeah.
It's really exciting how far we've come, even just in the 3.5 years that I've been working at AeroFarms. We had a trailer in a parking lot, and now we're gonna have a huge, I think 160 some thousand square foot farm in Virginia. So
congratulations.
It's incredible.
I can't wait to see it. Hopefully I can get a tour at some point.
Yeah.
I promise I'll scrub up. I won't go to another facility ahead of time. I'll put on blinders where you want me to.
There you go.
So, last question for you. What do plants crave?
I think to answer that, my first thing that comes to mind is balance. And I think everything needs, in all areas, consistency, but also just balance of the amount of water, the amount of light, the amount of nutrients, the amount of wind, everything. If one thing is like extreme, no one's going to be happy unless you're doing it on purpose. But I think that's what I would say in a succinct way, just balance.
I like that. That's a good answer. Okay, so I always end my podcast with some rapid fire questions. They are easy. Okay. Yes, no, one sentence, two sentences. You can go be, as I don't know, go into as much depth as you want, but really they're meant to be like just quick response, 1 or 2 sentences. All right.
Okay.
Are plants introverts or extroverts?
Introverts.
Why?
Gosh, I feel like they tell you when they're sad or when they're happy, but you have to know what to look for.
Ooh. So they're like Scorpios.
I guess so. I'm not a follower of horoscopes, but
well, now you will look that up.
Oh my gosh.
Can indoor farming feed the world?
I think so.
Okay. What is the best advice you've ever gotten about growing plants?
Oh my gosh. That is a hard question. The best advice? You mean like in vertical farming or just
Any
in
farming,
general?
anything.
Huh. I guess like don't over pamper them. I mean,
That's a good one.
at least I'm thinking now about, I'm looking at house plants next to me, but every time that people are like, how do you get your house plants to grow so well? I'm just like, I water them like once a month. I don't even really pay attention. You know what I mean? But of course that's not the same for our plants at the farm. We monitor them closely, but I don't think we, cater to their every need every day.
I like that. A lot of our guests have talked about the dangers of overwatering,
For sure.
especially
Yes.
houseplants.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And that's what I tell everyone who's like, oh my gosh, how do you do that? And I'm like, just don't water it.
Do you think
Don't do
people
it.
like water so much because it's like the one thing they feel like they can do for a plant?
They want to be as nice as they can to the plant, not realizing that that's actually going to make a negative impact.
Right. Okay. I'm going to turn that question on its heel. What's the worst advice you've ever gotten or that you've ever heard someone give? Maybe it wasn't even directed towards you.
That's a hard one. I may not have a quick answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's good though. I will say, if you've never gotten any bad advice or heard,
I'm sure I have. I guess I would say it's not really advice, just like expecting that. I mean, each plant is going to be different. Even if it's the same seed from the same plant, the two seeds could be different. They could grow into a different plant. And so just having a bad mentality would be just expecting it to always grow exactly the same way, and kind of not, honoring the fact that there's always diversity and variance in nature.
That's a good one. On that note, real quickly, have you ever had an outcome that, like from the diversity of that plant, or maybe something went wrong in the facility? Have you ever had a serendipitous moment where you're like, oh, I'm so glad that we screwed this up, or I'm so glad that this plant was different than what we expected, that turned into a positive?
For sure. Yeah, we
Cool.
have. Things go unexpectedly sometimes and you go, oh, that actually kind of was worked out.
Nice. I feel like when you were talking earlier about like the timing of when you might like tweak a variable, that could be a serendipitous moment, is if you did something too soon or you forgot to do something and you did it too late and you're like, oh, like that was an amazing outcome. I'm going to do that every time again.
Yes. Or even something that wasn't a negative outcome. Would be a big, and especially if, it saves you power or time or energy, you're like, oh, well, okay, maybe we don't need to do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. So last question. There's like 3 ways I want to ask this question, so I haven't quite figured it out. I almost want to ask all 3 in succession and then let you choose which question you want to answer. Okay, here are the 3 questions. What is your favorite plant to grow? Okay, number 2. If you could combine the flavor profiles of any 2 plants that you guys grow at AeroFarms, what would they be? Okay, number 3. What is the most interesting or unique tasting plant you've grown? You could answer them all.
Clarification for 3 that I've ever grown in the farm, or like at AeroFarms, or like in general?
I would say in general. Okay. But if you have to say it about AeroFarms, then you can.
Okay, well, those are all good questions. I think my favorite plant to grow at AeroFarms is, probably the microgreens. I really like our microgreens. They're my favorite from a flavor perspective because they're very delicate, but you don't have to cut them up, and they're really small, easy to eat, and they're just very tasty and flavorful too. I like them quite a bit. And I think they're really cute when they grow because they're this whole like dense carpet that we grow of microgreens. So I think those might be my favorite to grow at AeroFarms. For combining flavors, maybe the watercress with the kale would be really good. Whoa. Our kale is very Yeah, the kale is it's a little bit sweet and delicate, but also earthy and like kind of well-rounded. You know, how kale tastes. It's very balanced, I think. But watercress has more of like a pepperiness to it, a little more crunch. Those are probably, I'm biased because those are probably my two favorite ones of the baby greens that we grow. So that would be cool. And
I
then
asked you your favorite, so that was perfect.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Unique. I managed the campus garden at Indiana University. So while I was there, we grew golden raspberries, which were fantastic. And they were very, very sweet and delicious. And of course, raspberries are my favorite fruit. So
Good to know.
yeah, and they were amazing.
What's different about a golden raspberry versus a red raspberry?
I don't know, but I liked it.
But they're good. Okay. Are they more delicate? Do you think, is that why we don't see them?
They may be an heirloom variety, for example,
Okay.
which could be why we don't see them. Yeah, but they're kind of, those white strawberries, forget what they call them, pink berries or something. It's similar to that where you're like, oh, it's not ripe, but then you're like, wait a minute, it's this like delicious, juicy raspberry. So
nice. So are we going to see AeroFarms growing raspberries?
I'd love that. I don't know. We'll see. Let's talk to AgX, get them growing some raspberries.
Right? I mean, they got the person who can like do the taste testing for them.
I would sign up for that so quickly. Yeah, I've got to make some calls actually on that.
Yeah, I think we found your next step in the company there.
Yeah.
Right, the R&D program for growing golden raspberries. Well, Kathleen, it was so nice to talk to you. Thank you so much for being a guest. It was really nice talking to you and someone from AeroFarms. You guys have just done so much for this industry in general, and I'm really proud to be associated with you.
Thank you. Really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. This was What Plants Crave with Kathleen DeBrota, and we'll talk next time.
That was Dr. Nadia Sabeh interviewing Kathleen DeBrota, Director of Horticulture Operations at AeroFarms, for our series What Plants Crave. Tune in next week for our interview with Tad Hussey of Kiss Organics. Tad is co-founder of Kiss Organics and host of the Kiss Organics podcast, called Cannabis Cultivation and Science. I'm Dennis Wadan, and this has been The Doctor Is In with Dr. Nadia Sabeh. And thank you for growing with us.